Okay, we see people are still joining, but we're going to get started right away because it's 12:04. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this really important briefing. My name is Steve McDonald. I'm the VP of Communications and Marketing here at UJA. A number of you will have remembered that we've conducted these briefings in recent months just to share information about what's happening in Israel, what's happening here in our local community, particularly with the rise of anti-Semitism. We wanted to reconvene these on a more regular basis because we know that there's a lot going on. Many people have questions, but also many people have ideas and are working on different initiatives in the community to really strengthen the fight against anti-Semitism. So today's update is really focused on that topic, but similar to the previous sessions we did, we don't want to just share what's happening and what we're working on. We want to create a forum for people to ask questions, to share ideas. And so the first part of this session is really going to be to provide you with an update about what's happening. We're going to hear first from Noah Shack, who's UJA's Vice President of Countering Anti-Semitism and Hate. After Noah gives a brief update as to what we're working on and the latest developments, we're going to turn it over to Sarah Lepton, our Chief Development Officer, to talk about mobilization and what we're doing to engage the community in our work. And then at the latter half of the call, we're going to, again, open it up for a moderated Q&A. You'll see in the chat box, you can drop in any questions you may have. Or ideas that you'd like to share. But we also just want to start with the premise that this conversation isn't just about this webinar. If you have ideas after this call, if you have questions that come up during the week, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We receive a lot of correspondence from the community, but we do our best to get back to people as quickly as possible. You can always reach us at info@jewishtoronto.com. That's info@jewishtoronto.com. With that, I'm very pleased to open up the call for Noah Shack to begin. And again, looking forward to a very vibrant conversation, and just want to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to join us. Over to you, Noah.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that introduction, and I appreciate everybody joining us here today for this important conversation, and looking forward to the Q&A. We've seen Israelis put aside their differences to fight a vicious common enemy. And the fight against anti-Semitism here, our vicious common enemy in Toronto, requires that same unity within our community. We need to come together and work together if we're going to be successful in pushing back against the rising tide of hate. As Steve mentioned, we continue to see that anti-Israel protesters are more bold, more aggressive, more coordinated, more strategic. And this has only amplified the importance and the need for us to have a strategic and coordinated approach as well. I'd like to highlight three key strategic priorities to make an impact in the fight against Jew hatred here. The first is accountability for anti-Semites. Those who spread hate against Jews are growing more aggressive and brazen. Accountability means in some cases criminal charges, in other cases civil lawsuits. It means formal complaints against anti-Semites in leadership or professional roles, but also accountability in the court of public opinion, so that we can expose those leading the charge of hate against us to the broader public and make sure that they're seen for what they are. This leads to the second priority that I like to highlight. When we're talking about the broader public, we need to deepen our relationships with non-Jewish allies. We need allies, but how do we reach them and motivate them? It's about values. Most Canadians share our values of freedom, democracy, pluralism, and anti-Semitism threatens all of them. The problem is not enough Canadians recognize this yet. They don't see it for what it is. My colleague Sarah will be speaking about specific ways that community members can make a difference, and deepening relationships beyond our community is an absolutely crucial ingredient in our success. While we know many people beyond our community respect Jews and oppose hate, far too few are speaking out against Jew hatred. And it's essential that we deepen our relationships with these allies, expose the reality of the hate that we're facing, and encourage bystanders to become upstanders, to stand up for what's right, not just for our community, but for the broader community of Canadians. To do this, we need our community to lead the charge. And this is the third strategic priority I want to highlight. We need activists. Our community is strong, and many people want to make a difference, but some feel they don't have the knowledge or tools to take action. And we need to engage as many community members as possible to take concrete action against Jew hatred. There's lots that we can discuss across these three areas, and we could spend the entire afternoon together. But in the interest of time today, I want to focus in on accountability and give some key updates about some things that have been going on, particularly on the legal front, where how we can hold people to account under the law. The Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, or CJA, is UJA's advocacy agent. And one of the things we're working with them on is a legal task force that has brought together 260 volunteer lawyers, some of the top legal minds in their respective fields, to provide services to the community. The legal task force is both launching proactive legal efforts to hold organizations and institutions accountable for anti-Semitism, but it's also assisting community members who find themselves being targeted and under attack. For example, we've had situations where a community member working in the medical sector, for example, happens to post something pro-Israel on their personal social media channel and are suddenly targeted with a spurious campaign against them, a complaint at work, people calling into their employer with the goal of destroying their career. This is just one example across many workplaces, on university campuses, in public schools where this is taking place. The legal task force has already helped more than 300 people in our community who've been the victim of these incidents, providing free legal support to help them stand up for their rights. Now, if you or anyone that you know has experienced this kind of intimidation or challenge, please email us at info@jewishtoronto.com and we can get you connected. But not all of this work is taking place behind the scenes. And I want to give you a few quick updates on some very visible legal initiatives. Recently, the Government of Canada announced the restoration of funding for UNRWA, the UN agency which has staff that have been exposed as taking part in the October 7th attacks and providing support to terror organizations. In response, CJA is challenging this shameful decision in court with the goal of stopping the flow of Canadian funds to this organization, to UNRWA. And we'll keep you informed as this legal effort, this important legal effort, advances. With the assistance of CJA's legal task force, Jewish workers are taking the Public Service Alliance of Canada to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. They're calling for this union to be held accountable for promoting an anti-Israel agenda and fostering a culture of discrimination and harassment against Jewish members. UJA, CJA, and Pro Bono Ontario have launched the Combating Anti-Semitism in Schools project. This is a really important program that helps to address the rising hatred against students at our public schools. The project provides free legal services for families whose children are experiencing anti-Semitic harassment, intimidation, and bullying in the school environment. Another story that has recently come to light is around changes that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has made to its policies that threaten the very existence of kosher meat production in Canada. CJA has been working closely with kosher certification agencies and major kosher meat producers to oppose these changes and preserve kosher slaughter in this country. While engaging the government, CJA and leaders in the sector have been in ongoing conversation with the agency responsible to seek a viable solution, but they have not been responsive. And now CJA and the key parties are seeking a legal injunction to end this threat to Canada's kosher industry, supported by UJA and Montreal Federation. If this policy is not changed, the impact on tens of thousands of our community members would be immediate and profound. The cost of keeping kosher is already extremely high, and the kosher meat industry is under immense pressure. 3 of Canada's 5 kosher meat companies have had to close since last year. And this is all on top of the broader principle of making sure that this fundamental aspect of Jewish life is preserved here in Canada for our community. Jew-hating anti-Israel activists have been increasingly targeted Jewish institutions for protest. We've all felt this viscerally in our bones. Most recently, with the protests targeting synagogues in Thornhill. And because these activists, these protesters, are constantly shifting their tactics and increasingly targeting our community institutions. Together with CJA, we're calling on the Government of Ontario to change the law, to restrict protests from taking place in close proximity to any of our community institutions. These are a number of initiatives that are currently underway to use the law and to change the law to ensure that our community is being represented and protected in this critical time. And while these are being undertaken by institutions and organizations, there is an immensely important role for each and every member of our community to play to advance these initiatives and others so that we can be successful in pushing back against the hate we're facing. And I'll turn things over to my colleague, Sarah, who can talk more about how we can best mobilize as a community to have impact. Thank you very much. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Noah. I really appreciate addressing some of the key issues that are coming up in the chat. I do want to just take a minute to remind everybody that there is a box for Q&A. So if you have questions that you'd like us to address, please pop them in that Q&A box at the bottom, and we're really happy to address any of the concerns, questions you have about some of the big things that are going on in the community, about what UJA is doing, how you can help, things like that as well. So just to note that this forum is meant both for us to let you know more about what's been going on with some of the major organizations and what UJA has been working on behind the scenes, but also to address any questions and concerns that you have. So first and foremost, again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on. There really is no more important time for us to be united as a community. I've heard from so many people who are just asking what they can do to help. And I can tell you from UJA, from where we sit, it is a commitment that we are making to you to be more communicative with everybody, to let you know what you can be doing on a day-to-day basis to help support the efforts of the broader community. And we also really want to support many of the incredible grassroots initiatives that are coming forth. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can do that and how you can be in touch. But again, I want to thank everybody just for the time and the dedication and the ideas that you're bringing to the table. So thank you. Before we begin, as I begin, I want to briefly touch on the protests that we've been seeing really all over the city, but specifically in Thornhill last week. I know that, frankly, it's scary. It's disgusting. The hate, the open hate that we're seeing in our streets is something that most of us would never, ever have imagined. And they're in our communities, in our backyards. And it feels, honestly, like very violating. And we get that. We need to understand what these protests represent. We're going to talk a little bit about what we can be doing as a community to push back on these things. But we also need to recognize as a community that these protests are targeting Jewish institutions because they are looking to bring us into confrontations. They are looking to provoke us. They are directly confronting Israel activists, and they want to put us not just at risk in the sense of a safety risk, but they are also looking to catch us doing something that they can expose. You've seen, if any of you have been to these protests, you'll see that the anti-Israel activists are literally sitting there filming us all the time. They are sitting there and they are filming us, and they are trying to catch us doing something so they can go and they can share that broadly through their PR channels. So I would just say this. As a community, we need to stand up, and we should be very, very proud to stand up as Jews, always. But we should also make sure that we're looking through a lens of saying that we have to stand up against hate all the time, no matter who the hate is against. We have to stand up against it. And so, yes, we need to be proud, but we cannot be drawn in to violence, and we cannot be drawn into some of this confrontation because people are watching. We have to remember also that average Canadians who don't necessarily affiliate with either side in this conflict are driving by, are walking by, and we want to make sure that they understand that we are there. We are Canadians. We are supporting Canadian values. We are not just standing up as Jews. We are standing up as Jewish Canadians, and we are standing up against hate, against terrorism, against evil, and that's really what this conflict is about. So when we go and when we stand up as Jews, proud as we should, please just remember those things. I think that there have been a lot of chatter in the community about the kinds of messages that we bring when we do go to a counter protest or when we do stand up and march publicly. We would never say to somebody, don't stand up proudly or publicly. We should, but just again, we should always think through that lens of how is this going to look to Canadians who are just walking by and driving by, because we should be standing together against hate and evil. I know that there's been an intensity of these protests that's quite scary. And I know that there's also a very strong sense of frustration, fear, and anger in the community. And I also know that people are looking to channel that fear into meaningful action. So that's really what I want to spend some time talking about right now as we move on. So just quickly, there have been a number of very large-scale mobilizations in the community that we're calling on grassroots members to participate in. The first was something that took place last week. I know that there's been a lot of discussion, and something that we're all thinking so much about is the Canadian policies related to the conflict, including the reinstatement of UNRWA funding. Truly just a horrific thing to see. We are happy that so many people in the community sent very demanding letters, rightfully, to Minister Jolie, and as a result, she made an announcement offering RCMP support for investigations into sexual violence on October 7th. And she also offered, I think everyone's seen now, $1 million in support for the survivors. This came very shortly after so many of you had mobilized to call for these actions from the government. So thank you for doing that. This is one quick example of the impact that we can make when we speak up as a community and demand that the government do what's right. We need to be loud. We know that numbers count, and we're not winning the numbers game. There are just not as many of us. And so not only is it important for each and every one of us to speak up and to be vocal and to be active, and for us to get peers and friends and family in the Jewish community to do the same, but that we should be, as Noah said, building out to non-Jewish colleagues, to non-Jewish allies and friends, to ask them for their support as well. We should not be shy. We, UJA, has mentioned so many times since the beginning of this conflict that the single most important thing that we can be doing as a community is using our voice. We do not need to be experts in the conflict. Every time we do one of these webinars, I share with the community that so many people are wondering and asking us, how do they get more information about the history of the conflict, the borders, all of these different things. And I will say time and time again, your personal experience, how you are feeling about the hate and the violence and the anti-Semitism in the streets, how you are feeling about the lack of support from the Canadian government, those things matter more than anything else. You should share that, share your personal stories as you're speaking to your non-Jewish colleagues, to your friends outside of the community, because they need to hear from you. So definitely think about how you can share how you are feeling. If you're wondering what else you can do to stand up and fight anti-Semitism, I want to suggest a few very specific actions that you can take away today. The first is to speak out against the federal NDP motion that's scheduled for March 18th. So I know that many of you are already engaging in this. I believe that we already have just under 500 people in the community who are actively making phone calls through this UJA call initiative that we have going on. But the motion, just to be clear, the motion not only reiterates support for the UNRWA funding, it also calls for an arms embargo against Israel and immediate and unilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood. This would be a radical departure from Canada's traditional policy, and it would effectively reward Hamas and other Palestinian extremists for what they did on October 7th. This is really dangerous precedent. So if you're interested in volunteering to contact members of parliament, we will equip you with everything that you need, the tools and the information to be part of the campaign. You can communicate directly with elected officials in an effective way to prompt action. We have a call hub. You will be given a list of phone calls to make. You will be given a list of messaging and a script. It is really simple. So please to do that, and I think we're going to share that in a chat right now. You can send a quick email to activist@ujafed.org, and we can add you to the list of volunteers to make those phone calls. Again, this vote is in 4 days, so we need all the help we can get. So if you have some time, 10 minutes, 20 minutes to make these phone calls, please do this. It would be a huge help. The other thing that we need help with is an action alert that CJA sent out related to the NDP motion. So you can easily not just call these MPs, but email them to vote no to rewarding Hamas and changing Canada's longstanding foreign policy. So again, we will circulate that action alert, but please, it's super, super simple. These things matter. I've shared in previous community webinars, when politicians are looking at these things, they will look and see how many emails that they've received on a particular subject. And if they're getting 10,000 emails for them to vote yes, and they're getting 500 to vote no, that says a lot about what they're hearing from the grassroots. And everything these days comes bottom up. So we need to amplify our voice because we are smaller in number. So it really does matter. If you're wondering, should I take the time to send 10 emails, 20 emails? Please do. It doesn't take a lot of time. We are going to make it simple, but every single email that's sent matters and is considered when these politicians are evaluating how to vote on an issue. The second thing that we want to talk about, which was already discussed a little bit, is what happened in Thornhill, which is just the latest in an escalating pattern, which is why we're looking for solutions to address this issue beyond these single incidents. So together with CJA, we're calling on the government of Ontario to restrict protests from taking place in close proximity to these community institutions. If you haven't done so yet, please join us again, and we're going to send this information out in emailing Ontario's Attorney General to ask for this important policy change. We have a number of questions in the chat, some of which we've already responded to in writing, and people who are calling on us and asking why we're not looking for an injunction. An injunction to prevent these protests from taking place around religious institutions would really only be a stopgap. It would be a short-lived injunction to prevent these protests. We need broader legislation to eliminate and to restrict these protests from taking place on an ongoing basis. And that's why we're going that legislative route, looking at more expansive legislation to an injunction. And that's really, if we're going to rally community support around a legal, viable option, we need to do that around that long-standing legislation. So please help us with that as well. Last but not least, I want to recognize that there are so many great organizations and grassroots activists in the community who are working hard to combat anti-Semitism. I mean, I sit in a number of WhatsApp groups. I'm sure many of you sit in many WhatsApp groups and are speaking through groups at your synagogue and, maybe at the JCC or just peer groups, friend groups. So many people are emerging, and there are some excellent, excellent ideas and initiatives that are coming up from the community. I would love to invite you to bring some of those ideas to us if you're looking for support, if you want assistance, if you want guidance, if you have questions about security, if you're looking for funding. We're happy to have these conversations with you and to provide whatever support we can in those instances. So again, we're going to share that email address. It's activist@ujafed.org. We will have a more robust sort of solution to make things easier for people to bring ideas to us in the future. But for now, please send us an email. We're really happy to have those conversations because there's so many phenomenal things coming out of the community, because the one silver lining in all of this, and it's hard to even say that in a sentence, but is that so many people are leaning into their Jewish identity, and so many people want to stand up as proud Jews and fight back against this disgusting anti-Semitism that we're seeing. So please bring it to us. UJA is here to help, and I really mean that. We want to support you as the grassroots, and we want to be able to scale a number of these incredible things that are taking place. Last but not least, I want to encourage you to sign up for our activist update. So we have thousands of people already. Thank you for sharing that. Thousands of people already who are receiving these activist updates. We are not sending them broadly to our list because we don't want people to start unsubscribing if they're getting way too many emails from UJA, which I appreciate is a concern. So if you want these activist updates, please, please, please sign up. In them, we send them out every couple of days. They have very specific steps you can take, phone calls you can make, emails you can send, content that you can share to fight back against anti-Semitism. So please, you'll see this here, and you can sign up there. So I'm going to turn it back to Steve McDonald now, just to help us go through some of the questions that have come in from everybody. But again, thank you for being here, and don't hesitate to reach out at any time.
Okay, and thank you for that, Sarah and Noah. Thank you, everyone, for all the questions coming in. We've been able to answer some of them piece by piece. So I wanted to dive into a few of them right away. The first was, in building on what Sarah said about mobilizing people, someone asked a great question. They said, if volume of emails is a big factor in how MPs and elected officials view these issues, how do we overcome the numbers game. We know there's a lot of anti-Israel activists out there. There's a lot of people who are working very hard from a very different perspective to pressure MPs to take some very dangerous policy positions. So what do we do to overcome that numbers game? As someone who worked in an MP's office, as someone who's been on the other side of this, I can tell you, it isn't just about quantity, it is about quality. When you pick up the phone, when you set up a meeting in the constituency office of your MP, when you go with a few other constituents, so it's not just you alone doing it, when you build a relationship with the MP and go to their community events and get to know them, all of these things end up creating a relationship with the MP that really sets what you have to say apart from the masses of emails. So obviously sending an email is the quickest, easiest thing we're asking you to do, but we're not asking you to only do that. Sarah mentioned the telephone system we've launched. But this isn't a matter of only doing this through UJA or only doing it through our platforms. Get out there. If you have a relationship with your MP, if you've written to them before, if you've never written to them before, don't just send them an email, call their office, leave a voicemail, ask for a meeting. Make it very clear that you care enough not just to send the email, but to follow up and to really engage them. Because again, it's not just a numbers game, it is about quality, not just quantity. A number of people have asked about the role of police in protecting our community from anti-Israel hate and the really awful protests we've seen. I do want to start with a quick update regarding law enforcement. So folks on the call would know about UJA Community Security, our team of security experts that works closely with institutions across the GTA and also liaises directly with law enforcement in York Region and in Toronto and elsewhere. I have a quick update from the security team because a number of community members will have seen online there's been circulating a threat that was posted allegedly in Reddit by someone who talked openly about attacking a particular synagogue in the community. If you have seen this, if you've seen it on Facebook or elsewhere, I just want to assure you that we take this very, very seriously. UJA Community Security is well aware of the threat. We've spoken to the synagogue in question. We've spoken with Toronto Police. They are prioritizing this. Anytime it's a threat to safety, it's very much treated as a serious issue. Even if it's harassment or someone just trying to mess with our community, we have to treat it as though all of these things are serious. So if you've heard about a threat against a synagogue being posted on Reddit, please be assured we are on it and we're working with police to support the synagogue. But back to the issue of the Thornhill protests. And as someone who, lives short walk from where those protests took place and whose, kids walk by that street every weekend, it really shook me as it did many people, I think, in the Thornhill community. I want to speak to the issue of how police manage these things because people have asked questions like, can't police just arrest someone who calls for an intifada? Can't police arrest someone who covers their face? Can't police arrest these people if they're targeting our community? I want to go back to something we shared on a previous call, which is our role as community members is to report. We are not law enforcement. We are Canadians who, in this case, are victims of hate. One of the biggest factors that the police are looking at when they deal with these protests is what is the actual impact on the community? What's happening? Are there victims who are stepping forward and saying, I've been victimized? If you see something, please say something. It's not up to you to be a lawyer and to figure out, is this has this crossed a legal barrier or not? It's for you to report and it's for police to figure out how to enforce the law. But we also know, based on what's happened, as Sarah mentioned, the current laws are not adequate. And when you have a large mass of anti-Israel activists congregating outside a shul or a JCC, instantly police are in the position of trying to figure out how to deal with a very volatile situation and how to manage it. We don't want them in that position, and we don't want our community in that position. We need a buffer zone. We need a significant distance between Jewish institutions and anti-Israel activists because the anti-Israel activists are constantly pushing the envelope. What starts with volatile protests quickly proceeds to blocking access to institutions. We saw that at the AGO downtown. We've seen that in Montreal. And so the most important thing we can do is ask for police to maintain a significant distance between anti-Israel protests and any Jewish institution where these things can pop up. And so with that, if you see things, say things to police, make it very clear what you're experiencing. If you're a victim of a hate crime, report it to UJA Community Security because we do follow up with police. And at the end of the day, our message to police has been consistent. We not only want them to maintain public safety at these protests, we want them to actively monitor for hate speech and for incitement, because we know that these protests are really a hotbed of extremism, and it's very, very worrisome for us. So with that, Noah, maybe I'll kick it to you. If there's anything you want to add about police, please go ahead. But also, people were asking about campus and about legal action. And we've announced a few things with the legal task force. There are other things underway that we cannot announce publicly because it would, frankly, it would give our adversaries the ability to block our legal efforts. But is there anything you can tell us about sort of how this legal action strategy plays out in terms of supporting students and staff who are Jewish on campus?
Yeah, well, there have been a number of, as I alluded to earlier, a number of, and by a number, I mean dozens of incidents where students and faculty have required legal support in filing complaints against their administrations and holding anti-Semites accountable in the campus space. And similar to what we're doing with regard to the changes to legislation to support our community and keeping those protests away from our community buildings. There's also an important initiative that the government of Ontario has launched to require universities to implement robust policies with regard to anti-Semitism and hate, but mentioning anti-Semitism specifically. And it's an issue that CJA is actively lobbying on to ensure not only does this requirement result in meaningful policies, but that there's teeth, that there's accountability, that there's not just a piece of paper that says what should be happening, but there are mechanisms in place to ensure that that's what's actually happening, to hold anti-Semites accountable and ensure that people are behaving themselves in the way that we would all expect in a university environment, which should be a place of learning, not a place of hate. So I think those are two things on that front that are really important. And I should say that it's not CJA alone that's engaged on this. I opened up by talking about the importance of unity at this time. And since October 7th, we've convened a war room to bring together various organizations and volunteer experts in our community to work together and make sure that we are addressing these challenges in a unified way across organizations. And while each organization in the Jewish community, whether it's CJA or it's B'nai B'rith or Friends of Simon Wiesenthal or Honest Reporting or many others, really may have a different flavor or a different approach or a different area of focus, the unity that we are experiencing right now, the way that people have come together to solve problems together, to manage issues together, and to plan future strategic approaches together is unprecedented. And it's something that I think we can build upon even further as we continue to mobilize as a community to have impact. So there's a lot of importance in this unity, but I don't want to leave the impression that it's not already something that we're working on and already a core facet of the community-wide response to this surge in anti-Semitism that we're all experiencing. Okay,
and Noah, I just want to jump in on that point around the surge of anti-Semitism. You know, people have often been asking us, you know, what's really happening in society? I mean, it often feels that we're alone and that no one gets it beyond our community. And one of the things that we do consistently at UJA is we conduct public opinion research to understand how these issues are being felt by Canadians far beyond our community. And since October 7th, we've conducted a few significant studies to understand how Canadians are viewing these things. And those studies really confirm what we've seen over years of research, which is, first, most Canadians like Jewish Canadians. So Jews are respected, Jews are appreciated, Jews are seen as making a significant contribution to Canada. In fact, if you look at religious groups, the Jewish community is usually the second most popular religious community in this country. Buddhists tend to be the most popular, Jews tend to be the second most popular, and that includes Christian religions and sects. But on top of that, Jews are seen as people who contribute immensely to Canadian society. That has not changed with the conflict. The studies also really show that while there is a minority of Canadians who hold anti-Semitic views, and this is extremely worrisome, there's a much, much larger proportion of Canadians, about double, who oppose anti-Semitism, who, when you ask them about various anti-Semitic statements, they strongly disagree with them. We're talking about a significant proportion of Canadian society, up to about half, who aren't neutral about anti-Semitism. They don't like it. They oppose it. The challenge we have is that that same audience, those same Canadians, don't necessarily think it's a part of our lived reality here. They know about anti-Semitism. They've heard about it overseas or in other countries. They don't necessarily think it's a part of our life here in a city like Toronto. And so Canadians like Jews. They don't like anti-Semitism, but they also don't recognize that we're experiencing real hate and it's impacting our lives. Interestingly enough, post-October 7th, when we really tried to dive into this with the recent rise of anti-Semitism, we did find a very interesting result. Most Canadians believe that the pro-Palestinian protests, and we framed it that way, that the pro-Palestinian protests are actually tainted by anti-Semitism. In fact, a majority of Canadians think that. And this was earlier in the conflict, before the protests really started spreading out of the downtown and going into Jewish neighborhoods. Canadians overwhelmingly are appalled by extremism of any kind. They don't like the idea that Canadian Jews are being targeted right now because of events in the Middle East. And they really don't like the idea that people walking into a JCC or into a synagogue would be screamed at or intimidated. When we shine a light on these things, Canadians don't like it. And it is far more likely that Canadians are going to be sympathetic and want to support our community, especially if they know us and get to know us. And so I just want to assure people, Canadian society, based on all of the research we've conducted and reviewed, and we've looked at quite a few studies, Canadian society is not anti-Israel. Canadian society is not anti-Semitic. There is a very loud minority in this country that's making our lives very uncomfortable right now. And so what we want to do, to Noah's point about our strategy, is to galvanize Canadians who are friends of ours, who know our community, who quietly support us. We want to galvanize them to actively and vocally support us. We can't be alone. We can't have a country of bystanders. We need to wake up our fellow Canadians to the reality of what we're experiencing, not just because it targets us, but because it threatens what Canada really stands for. And so, with that, maybe we'll get to another question. People have asked a lot about, what we can do around this issue of kosher slaughter in Canada. Various people have asked, can we work with the Muslim community? Is this affecting halal? This issue does not affect halal slaughter, so it's not an issue where there's a coalition of communities fighting it. It really is an issue for us to continue dealing with the government directly, advocating with industry leaders, and also in this case, starting to use legal tools at our disposal in the form of, in this case, an injunction to stop the current policy from continuing to really destroy the kosher meat sector. People are asking Noah and Sarah about what we can do to really engage not just on the issue of anti-Semitism, but what we can do to build allies in support of Israel right now. What can we do to ensure that Canadians start to understand the reality of what Israel's experiencing? Because the media coverage is so, in many cases, just so awful and distorted that people are concerned rightly about the impression Canadians are getting about Israel right now. Do either of you want to field this one?
I can start and then I can pass it over to Sarah. I think, unfortunately, while October 7th lives at the front of all of our minds on a daily basis, the events that took place, the horrors that continue to haunt Israelis and Jews around the world are not top of mind or front of mind for Canadians. And it's important to remind people of the depravity of those incidents, but also the general depravity of Hamas and other terror organizations in Gaza and the plight of the hostages. It's important that that be brought to the forefront, that people remember that is what this is all about, that whatever you may think about the war, this is why there's a war. And the reality that Steve touched on in the polling is that Canadians overwhelmingly recognize Hamas, recognize that it's evil, and the more we remind people of that, the more they can hold that in their mind and understand to a greater extent why they're seeing on the newscast what they're seeing. The other thing that's really important is to connect the dots and help people to understand that what's going on over there is actually leading to anti-Semitism on the streets and hate directed against fellow Canadians on the streets here in Canada. And that also helps people to understand the impact and the implication of viewing what's going on over there in an extreme or one-sided way. And as Steve touched on, Canadians like us. They don't want us to be targeted with hate. They don't want foreign conflict to be imported to the streets of Toronto. And I think those three things, the depravity of Hamas, the plight of the hostages, and the experience of hate that's coming to Canada as a result, are three key things that we want to be sharing with people to help them understand the current moment.
Sorry, I was on mute. I completely agree with, and again, I said this earlier in the call, but I think that it's so important for us to simplify the message. And it's so important for us to really, on an ongoing basis, frame the conflict as what it is, which is our Canadian values and, shared values of democracy and freedom and all of those things against evil and terror and people who threaten our way of life. Like, that is an incredibly important message that we need to bring out to community anytime we have this conversation. Steve, I think there was another question we were gonna.
Yes. So we had a question related to security at day schools. People are obviously concerned about security at day schools, and they want to know what UJA is doing to really support and strengthen security where we have thousands of kids every day congregating in our community.
Yeah, obviously top of mind. I have kids at a day school, so personally and professionally thinking a lot about this. I'd say a few things. First of all, the Toronto Police has been great, which many of you who have kids in day schools will see. They've really increased their police presence around the school, so that's good. Not enough, but it's good. What we've been doing a few things. So first, the UJA security team, I should say, is in the process, we are in the process of scaling it up aggressively. I keep using that word, but really putting a lot more funding and sort of team members in place to lead community security. It's an incredibly, incredibly important piece for all of us right now. And that's not just for the school community, it's for the synagogue community, Jewish day school, Jewish community centers, synagogues, day schools, anywhere, frankly, where there are Jews gathering. I've also seen this question, which is, do we just provide security for UJA funded partners? No, not at all. We are there providing Jewish community security across the security, again, for like anywhere where Jews gather in Toronto. It's not just for our partners. Going back to the schools in particular, we've done a couple of things recently. Number one, we've never actually distributed direct grants to schools in the past, and synagogues and things like that, to institutions from us. We've in the past lobbied government for funding, specifically through the security infrastructure program and things like that, to get funds for our institutions. But in the aftermath of October 7th, UJA decided that we were also going to release funds directly to those institutions. And more than that, we were asking institutions to apply for government funds, and then we were providing matching funds in some instances. So we're still looking to scale that more and to provide more funding. We are actively fundraising right now $4 to be able to pass on to institutions so those institutions can enhance their own security infrastructure. That's very important. And it's something that every Jewish community institution needs right now. So an area where we as UJA are trying to leverage some of these resources and our ability to fundraise to pass on those funds through these grants to institutions. That's one. Number two, we had a question about parent protectors at schools. But I'll say it's broader than that. It's now, I think we're calling it community protectors now. If you've been to the UK or Paris or Sydney or Melbourne or many other communities around the world, Jewish communities, they rely heavily on Jewish community volunteers to stand up and to participate in protecting our community, to walk around schools, to do patrol, things like that. I remember as a grad student in London, England, years ago, when we had Hillel meetings, we had like nice volunteers from the British Jewish community who were patrolling our Hillel meetings, like our Jewish student campus meetings, right? We need to create a culture of activism and volunteerism in Toronto as well. And it starts with our schools. So if any of you are on day school email lists, you'll see that they've sent out a call for volunteers through the UJA Community Protector Program. We've relaunched that program. And we're calling on community members to sign up to be volunteers right now with UJA and to patrol those schools. I'll tell you, a lot of people are asking me, why don't we bring off-duty police, more off-duty police, things like that. There is no chance an off-duty police who comes in for one day, who stands outside of a day school, will be able to spot an issue as quickly as you will as a parent or grandparent. A parent or grandparent standing outside a day school who sees someone who shouldn't be there will be able to assess much more quickly that that person doesn't sit right and probably doesn't have a kid or grandchild in that school than an off-duty police who doesn't know our community. So it's really, really important. Like, I know it's so easy for people to say we should be doing this, we should be hiring more, we should be spending more money, but there is nothing that can replace our own community members standing up and volunteering and helping. And so again, we will circulate that link to volunteer, but you've already received it if you're part of a school community. And the more volunteers that we have through those schools, the more impactful we will be in terms of making sure our school communities are safe. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. So people have asked about various questions that all kind of have a common theme. They've asked about what we're doing with school boards. They're asking about what we're doing with campus. They're asking about what we're doing with media, what we're doing with government. I want to take a moment to touch on this. When we're talking about people who are in positions of authority, they're in newsrooms, they're in government offices, they're making decisions that impact our community. Our strategy is really to have as many tools at our disposal to make our voice heard. In some cases, it is about having meaningful relationships with editors in newsrooms, with people on Parliament Hill, with people in the school boards. Cultivating those relationships, and that goes back many years, doesn't happen in a crisis. The relationships become very important in a crisis because our issues are being affected, but we build relationships and we try to work as constructively as possible with those that we view as being very open and receptive to our community. But that doesn't mean we don't also have at our disposal the ability to mobilize the community to speak out, in some cases to speak out in a way that's very assertive and direct about what's not working and what needs to be changed. And that too also doesn't mean we don't have a legal option as a tool. And so, we've been speaking to people on Parliament Hill about why Canada should stand with Israel and why the Canadian government needs to take meaningful action against anti-Semitism. We've also been calling on the community to email those elected officials from time to time when there are big issues, including with this NDP motion that's coming up in a few days. And we've also gone the legal route, as we're about to do with the UNRWA issue, to launch legal action to prevent Canadian funds from flowing to UNRWA. That strategy, that multi-level strategy, applies everywhere. It applies with media, it applies with school boards. We always start from the premise of working with the system because we've seen in many cases working with the system works, but we also know that we have options when the system doesn't work and when we have to exercise our democratic voice more assertively or even through the legal system. Again, at the end of the day, going back to Noah's strategy, it's about really two important things. How do we build relationships that ensures we're not alone in speaking out, but we have more Canadians in positions of influence, making clear this is a Canadian issue, not a Jewish issue. And then how do we ensure that those who are spreading hatred and lies about our community are held accountable? How do we ensure that they're held accountable before the law, whether that's criminal or civil litigation? How do we ensure that Canadians hold them accountable socially in the court of public opinion so that they're not able to attract large numbers of Canadians to support their cause? And really, how do we ensure that the community can speak out and be empowered to speak out? Because we can't do this as just professional organizations. We need every community member as possible to be a part of this. And there are many fantastic initiatives taking place in the community right now. Some within UJA, some outside UJA. All of this is good, and all of this is really important. So I kind of want to echo what Sarah said earlier. If you have something underway, if you're working on an initiative, and we've seen people writing in the chat various events and programs going on, please email us. We are here to help in any way that we can. Again, the best way to get a hold of us is through activist@ujafed.org. That's activist@ujafed.org if you have an advocacy initiative underway. But with that, I think Noah and Sarah, we have time for probably one more question. As I scan the questions, do either of you have anything that you want to share before we wrap up in the next few minutes?
Noah, why don't you go first?
I think there's just one sector that you didn't mention that I saw has come up in the chat a couple of times, which is unions, and particularly CUPE, where there has been a number of problems both with the leadership and otherwise. And I do want to just remind folks that there is a lawsuit that is being brought against CUPE with more than 50 Jewish CUPE members, and I believe some non-Jewish CUPE members who have signed on as well. And so if that's something that people who in the Q&A have been raising concerns, if they want to find out how to get connected to that lawsuit, we can help connect them to the right people to take part, or if they're fielding concerns from other people who are CUPE members who might want to take part. The more people raising their voice and lending support to these complaints that can help hold unions to account, the better.
Thanks, Noah. Just as we close, I just want to reiterate, not just what Steve said, I've said a few times now, which is please reach out to us. We really do want to help. It's just to say, I've been working in community now for 8 years, and I was a volunteer before that for a long time with different organizations. I've never seen so many community organizations collaborating in such an incredible way as I have since October 7th. And my colleagues at other organizations, the leadership of other professional organizations in the community, it's really been quite seamless. And I think there are so many people out there who are wondering, are we collaborating? Are we working together? How do we make sure that we're efficient as a community? I know Noah spoke about it briefly, but just to say and give everyone sort of an understanding of how this is working, all of these organizations, we are sitting together, we are speaking daily, we are coordinating, and we're also identifying where the gaps are. Like there's been a big gap in certain areas with respect to digital and social media. And so what UJA's role is in that instance is to identify the gap among all the orgs and to say, we're going to make sure that we have a solution to address that gap. And sometimes it takes time for us to get the polling and to go through and to make sure that we're spending money in the most impactful way. But the gaps are being identified and we are working collectively and collaboratively. So I'm really happy to chat with anyone who has questions, ideas, concerns about that offline, but I don't want people to worry that there's so much duplication and then there are whole areas that are not being addressed. I totally appreciate that sometimes it's really difficult to get information, and that's why you're gonna start to see a lot more coming out of UJA. We're gonna really increase sort of the amount of communication coming to you about how you can get involved, what you can do, and things like that. But I just, I want everyone to have some confidence that the leadership at all these organizations right now are doing everything they can, everything we can to lead. And if you want to have a conversation, I really urge you to reach out. So thank you all so much for doing what you're doing.
And as we wrap up, Sarah and Noah, I should add, from a communications perspective, probably the biggest challenge we face is not just that there's so much happening and there's a lot of volume of things that are happening and we want to provide meaningful information without swamping the audience. Often we have updates or information that we have to be very careful about how we put it out because we don't want to provide intelligence to our adversaries, whether it's a lawsuit we're working on that's going to go public in the coming months, whether it's polling data like the information I just shared, and there's lots more to the polling data. We have a lot that we're working on that if we were to put it online publicly, frankly, our adversaries would take it and use it against us. And so what I'd like to invite everyone on the call to consider is, if you are a group of activists or you want to, get your synagogue involved in this work, whatever it may be, if you want to be active, please reach out to us. We can arrange a parlor meeting. We can arrange a Zoom briefing. We can do lots of things to equip you and other activists with all of this data, with some behind the scenes information. Even if we can't put these things out for broad public consumption, because some of these issues are very sensitive, that's not to say that we can't engage activists in parlor meetings and Zoom meetings and that sort of thing. So if you would like more information, if you would like a training session, anything like that, please reach out to us. We'll arrange that.
And thanks, Steve. And so we're happy to come speak at parlor meetings. We're happy to do briefings of polling results, like everything that Steve's saying, we're really happy to do, and we're doing on an ongoing basis. We're also happy to come and speak to groups of non-Jewish colleagues or peers, like some of the law firms, some of the banks. We have teams of professionals at UJA who are really happy to come and do briefings with your non-Jewish peers and colleagues. So that's also something that we can do, either in your home, at an office, lunchtime, anything like that, we're happy to do. I just want to point out one last thing. We have 113 open questions that we didn't get to, okay? So we've had almost 150 questions come in the chat. I know we can't get to everything. We've done our best to sort of look at common themes. We're going to, as we said, do these calls every other Thursday at noon, and we're going to look through the questions we didn't get to and try to address them on an ongoing basis on these calls. You can also send this email to either our info at email or activist at UJA Fed. We're also happy to engage with you that way. So if we haven't gotten to your question, it's just because there are 150 of them and it's very difficult to get through everything. But again, we're here. We want to help. So please reach out.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us over your lunch hour. We really appreciate it. Thank you for the questions. Again, as Sarah mentioned, we're going to convene this again in 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, reach out to us at any time. Follow us online, especially on Instagram. We post a lot of updates there. And with that, we're going to wrap things up and just invite you to keep in touch and keep engaging in these issues. Thank you so much.